Now that we've covered the basics, it's time to have some fun and get into building this bookcase project, shaker style. Now remember, go into the CD-ROM and print out any of the files that you want. And if you're building this project, print the plan out for this, for the style that you want, the traditional, the shaker, or the country. We'll do the shaker. Now look at this project. It's a doable weekend project, and you'll have about $100 in material. We'll use figured maple for all the solid trim that's been planed to a 3/4 inch thickness, and you know how to do that now. And also for the case, there's a lot of plywood used, 3/4 inch thick plywood. We'll use birch, and then I'll show you how to finish it to look like cherry. Now, look at the case. It's plywood, 1/4 inch back, 3/4 inch thick sides, and 3/4 inch thick top and base to the case. Now, the very bottom is a separate assembly. That's plywood wrapped with solid wood. And then the top is very easy to do. 1 plywood board and 3 mitered boards with a beveled edge. So the way we start this project, print the plan, and then head to the table saw and work on the plywood first. We're going to cut out the plywood case pieces. Now what I'm looking at here is 3/4 thick birch in good grade. You have to have one good face, because these will be the sides, left and right. But this stuff weighs a ton, so whatever you do, wherever you buy your 3/4 inch thick plywood, have them rip it down the length, right in the middle, and that way you can manage it on the table saw when you go to size all the work pieces. You need a sheet and a half of the 3/4 inch thick plywood, and you need a whole sheet of 1/4 inch thick birch. Now this is so light you can use it, and here you can see the rip fence is already locked in this case, 15 1/8 away. What that will do is net me out this core panel. I'm going to rip it with the grain, a rip cut with the grain, cross cut across the grain. Use plenty of support, keep the blade sharp, and let's make some cuts. The 1/4 inch back plywood is ripped to the right width. I'll show you how to cross cut that in a second. But now I need to prep the 3/4 inch birch plywood. And the 2 sides of the bookcase, 3/4 inch ply, 11 3/4 in width, 71 1/2 in length. I'll show you how to cut it in length at the workbench. But I need to rip down all my material of 3/4 first. Make those cuts. Here's the right side of the plywood workpiece cut to that finished 71 1/2 inch length. And I don't like to cut to length on the table saw because it makes it ungainly. It's hard to control. This is scrap wood here. Save that for a jig later on. But right here you can see that this is one of the 3 identical shelf boards. On this project, there's one fixed shelf here that's dadoed into the sides. There's a shelf board that's really the top here and the bottom down there. They're all identical, 11 3/4 by 31. Let me show you a tip. This is a great way to go. Here's the board that I'm going to score in the line to the finished length, 31 3/4. But look at that cut. It's terrible. It really raised the veneer. The good news is that will go into a dado. I'll never see it. So I want this to be a seam board and a good cut. So there's my line to length. And this is just blue painter's tape, 1 inch precisely in width that I lay on the downside of that line. And then I bring up this clamp and tool guide. This has clamps on the bottom. You just slide it in, put it precisely on the bottom edge of that tape, and now I can clamp this down, and look at this. You can see that the blade is actually right on the outside edge of that. In other words, the offset from the edge of this fence guide to the very outside edge of the blade is precisely where it needs to be to make a perfect cut. Now one other thing, I want to save this piece too, so I'll lay a piece of tape right on top since I already know everything's going to work beautifully. We'll make the cut and we'll check out what happens to the veneer. This is a great way to go. Make sure you hold this secure to the clamp guide. Now, let the blade come to a complete stop on these circular saws before you lift it off. That's important. You saw what it looked like before. Now look at it. It gives you a beautiful, clean edge. So this is a technique that I'll use to cut all the work pieces to length. All right, now that's the final plywood cut right there. And if you look closely, you can see this is the backer that's 32 3/4 wide by 71 1/2 long. Here are the top and bottom boards of the case assembly, 12 5/8 by 33 long. Here are the adjustable shelves that are more narrow, 10 3/4 by 31 1/8. And there are the 3 fixed shelf boards, which are 11 3/4 by 31 3/4. Now, let's look over here and take a look. Okay, everything makes sense now. We've got our back plywood panel, 1/4 inch. We've got the plywood sides. And look at the trim boards here. These pieces that are horizontal are called rails. Now, that's just a trim board on a shelf there and there, but this is a rail. This is a top rail. Anything that's like a rung on a ladder is considered a rail on this project. Now the verticals, though, those are called stiles, stile and rail assembly. And this vertical is a glue up. We need 2 pieces, 71 1/2 long, that net out a workpiece 1 1/4 by 1 1/2. Let's get over to the table saw. And remember, all the material for this project have been planed down to 3/4 inch thickness earlier.